Good morning! Thank you, Ethan, for joining today's live stream. I am very excited today to talk about the M2 MacBook Air, which I am currently live streaming from using the onboard microphone and webcam. However, I do apologize if it's echoey in here. I'm not in my normal streaming setup. And we're also on battery power, so we're going to figure out how the MacBook Air handles live streaming in regards to the battery during this test. We're at 79% currently. I have a charger in case it's not the charger, but I have a charger in case it drains super duper fast. But good to see you all. I basically have had very light interactions with the MacBook Air so far. Um, I essentially unboxed it and was filming and editing the unboxing and posted it as soon as I could. And then me and my wife were packing and off on a road trip. So now we're out of state. We're with my parents visiting with them. And it does relate to the channel a little bit because my dad actually has some very old Apple computers that are still working. He's testing them out right now. One is a Macintosh Classic. One is like one of the original iMacs that's like as old as I am. But the Macintosh Classic is older than I am, and they still work. So in a later stream in the week, we'll probably dive more into those. But for today's live stream, I just wanted to highlight how the MacBook Air sounds and looks. And unlike my MacBook Pro, it's very light and small, so it's easy to just like toss you guys around and throw you around if I need to. And one thing that might actually put the MacBook Air ahead is the fact that there's no fans in it. So genuinely, like no matter how hot or no matter how heat intensive this thing gets, it's never going to make a sound when it's processing. You know, it's like it may throttle, it may get slower, and that might impact your performance. But I think that honestly, people have been complaining about MacBook Air performance since the product existed, and the product line has just continued to improve and get better and better over time and expand, and more people have bought it. Now it's Apple's most popular model, I believe. The M1 MacBook Air was their best-selling Mac, and now the M2 MacBook Air is out. We'll see how that contrasts because they're still selling the M1 MacBook Air for cheaper. So I have a feeling that that might still sell pretty well, but motion sickness engaged. Yes, this is this onboard mic. Everything is straight from the. I'm reading the chat off of the MacBook Air. I don't have my MacBook Pro in the room. It's out there. I still brought it on the trip because I'm actually planning on departing ways with the MacBook Air before our trip ends. So I'm going to need something to edit with later. But in case anyone was wondering how the MacBook Air sounded and how the webcam looked, this live stream is a decent indication of how that looks. Keep in mind, though, there's also still YouTube processing. So there's some compression going on from YouTube's end. And this room is kind of echoey because it's big and it has a lot of flat walls on the side and it's not really full. So maybe it's a tad echoey, but how does it sound to you guys? People are saying the mic is impressive. That's good. Most people aren't doing video editing with an Air. Not sure why the reviewers are crying. I actually just did, but you're right. The most majority of people using the MacBook Air are probably not using it for editing. But I really wanted AirPods Max, but they hurt my ears. Do you know why could be? No, I don't. Probably just oddly shaped. Um, Sorry, now it sounds like I'm attacking you. Your ears just might be laid out in a way that aren't well optimized for AirPods Max. How many tabs have I opened with it? Not that many, honestly. I'm not the kind of guy that has like 10 tabs going, but on this trip, I'm basically filming everything off my iPhone. I'm using separate microphones for audio reasons. My Zoom mic just sounds so much better than the iPhone mic, but whenever I go on trips, I like to start filming things straight off the iPhone because most of the time people don't notice or care. And it's just so much easier to pack and airdrop footage straight to the laptop, so that was easy. I actually used my 16-inch MacBook Pro as like a wireless SD card adapter. Oh, thank you, J Money. How good is the display and speakers? Yeah, I can get into that. I'll finish my thought there for a second. Basically, because the MacBook Air does not have an SD card slot, but my MacBook Pro does. I plug the SD card slot into the Pro and then airdrop the audio to the Air so that I can edit straight off it and get a feel for it. So the display is very nice. Considering it's a standard LCD, there's really not much fancy about it other than the fact that it's bigger than the last generation. But I didn't use the M1 MacBook Air very frequently. I haven't used one since 2020, so it's been a while for me. My only issue, which isn't really an issue, it's just kind of a preference thing, is the size. I'm already feeling like the 16-inch MacBook Pro is kind of small for me. So now that I'm switching to the MacBook Air, I'm like, ugh, this just the windows and stuff and the layout of even the trackpad just feels a bit small and constrained for me. But it's probably just because I'm not used to it. If you're used to a 13-inch laptop, it's probably no big deal for you. There's no center stage on the MacBook Air. That is requiring a bigger webcam component that they can't seem to stuff in these tiny display lids. The MacBook Pros didn't get center stage, so I would be surprised if the MacBook Airs did. Although I will be completely transparent. I was a little bit underwhelmed by the speaker system. I'll show it in the review. I plan on reviewing this later in the week. I'll do like a formal edited video where I break down everything and get into the nitty gritty stuff. Probably not as nitty gritty as some channels do, where they do like every speed test and every Geekbench test and all that. It is a little brighter, though I don't have a side by side to compare it to. I don't notice the lack of mini LED. That's something I'll feel comfortable sharing. Is like I go back and forth between the Pro and the Air, and both have great dynamic range to me. I don't notice a big difference in display richness. They both feel like they have good pixel density, and the colors look great, and they get pretty dang bright. I can turn it up a lot right now, but you can't see it. It's probably just going to drain the battery. So yeah, I'm happy with the display. The size is not really my preference, and the bezels are a little bit thicker than my MacBook Pro, but hey, it was a fraction of the price, so I don't think that's a big issue. The speakers are not where I thought they were. When I don't know why I missed it, but when they unveiled the MacBook Air, I thought the speakers were going to be alongside the keyboard, similar to the 14-inch MacBook Pro. But they're actually hidden. There's no way for me to show you this, but like I'm looking at them right now. The speakers are hidden in the little lip where the hinge is above the function keys. So the speakers are kind of built like iPad speakers because they're not front facing. And they're kind of hidden, so they're kind of blasting sound against like the chin of the display, not where the pixels are, but right beneath that. They're like behind the keyboard, and they're blasting that way. And even at full blast, they're loud, and I've heard they're better than the old MacBook Air. So again, my perspective is probably twisted because you're hearing a perception of a guy that's coming from a 16-inch MacBook Pro going to this, which is a cheaper laptop. So my expectations weren't incredibly high, but I guess I just thought that the speaker quality wouldn't be that night and day between the Pro and the Air. But for me, it's genuinely night and day. Like we watched a TV show once we got off our road trip. By the way, a couple days ago, I drove for like 12 hours straight. We set a record. Like I got to my parents' place, and they were like, no one has done that drive that quickly before. So I was pretty tired. But we were watching a TV show, and because it wasn't like a review reason, and my wife and I just wanted the biggest display possible because we were lying in bed watching TV. So we pulled out the 16-inch MacBook Pro, and man, the low frequencies, the bass that speaker system can accomplish is incredibly good. It's just insane how rich the sound quality is, and how much bass you can feel on a laptop. Like you're not used to laptops sounding that good. And when you switch to this, it feels, my memory might be bad, but I want to say it almost sounded worse than the iPad Pro speakers. I don't have a side-by-side because I haven't used my iPad in months, and I did not bring the iPad on the trip just because I've completely lost all use for it. Side note, I've been catching up with my dad over the past few days. He also does not use his iPad anymore. He just uses his phone for everything. He's like, my iPhone gets the job done. He uses the 11 Pro Max that I had for like a year. He's still using it. He's still rocking it and doesn't really have much complaints. But he's like, yeah, the screen's plenty big on that, and I can swipe between apps and whatever. So yeah, it's funny that like I'm a tech guy and I was kind of upset about the iPad OS 16 updates not being very major, and I'm not using the iPad, and my wife is not really a techie person, but she's not using her iPad, and neither is my dad. They're just like, yeah, I'd rather just use my phone. Gets the job done, and there's not really that much the iPad can do that my phone can't. In fact, there's some things that the iPhone can do that the iPad can't, despite being much smaller. So, the speaker quality on the MacBook Air, I'd probably be happier with it if I compared it side by side, because I've heard that the M2 Air speakers are better than the M1, but I have a feeling it's not by much. It's just there's really almost no bass. There's like barely any low frequencies achieved with the speaker system on this one. And I guess that should kind of matter. I feel like that should be a point that should matter, because they improved the audio jack on the MacBook Air for high impedance headphones. So it's like if you're leaning into the audiophile market, then yeah, I'm sorry, I might be a little bit picky with the speaker quality, especially considering the price increase here. So it's not that it's worse than the M1 Air necessarily, but it's noticeably worse than the Pros, which are not that far away in price. You know, the price gap between this and a MacBook Pro is not that high. So it's those kinds of differences people are going to be looking for when they're shopping for a MacBook. It's like, okay, I could save money and get an Air, but where am I compromising? Speaker quality might be a big one. The biggest difference I noticed with the display is still the 60 hertz, though. I didn't bring it up in the unboxing, and someone was like, "Hey, Drew, thank you for not bringing that up." And I'm like, I should have said something, but I do notice it. Obviously, with Mac OS and just how Windows work here, you don't have as much motion as you do with an iPhone or an iPad. Like you're swiping between apps and you swipe up to go home. There's just a lot more fluidity on the entire display with a touchscreen, whereas a MacBook is a lot more like static windows. There's still some motion, but every time I jump back to the MacBook Pro, I see it with the mouse. As soon as the mouse moves around, I'm just like, oh, yep, that's way smoother. So, unsurprisingly, using the MacBook Air is making me kind of miss my MacBook Pro. Shouldn't shock me. This is a much cheaper product, and they had to make compromises with it. But if you're asking if I do notice it, like some people may have been asking or maybe curious, like, well, does this make you feel like you didn't need your Pro, like you can get by with the Air? I don't really feel that way. I'm kind of like, no, this is too small, and the speaker quality is not that great, and the trackpad, honestly, I was not expecting to feel like such a big downgrade. Um, but iPad Pro beating out the MacBook Air, at least it can do something better than a Mac. I don't officially know if that's true. I might need to do a side by side comparison, but I just remember someone after, I finished the filming and editing and unboxing, and because we were busy packing for a trip, I didn't have that much time to play with the MacBook Air, but someone in the comments after I posted the video was like, you should do a speaker test. And I was like, oh, dang, I should have tested them. So after I read that comment, I started playing music on it, and I was just kind of like, is that it? Is that what it sounds like? I was like, maybe something's wrong with the song. So I pulled up a song that I knew was very bass heavy, Delirious Boneless. I found that song from Mike. So shout out to Mike for finding that song. It's a really bass heavy song that I love listening to. And I played it on the MacBook Air, and I was like, oh, yeah, it's like almost nothing. It's like they went all in on the mids, and the mids are just kind of pretending to be bass, but it's not working. Um, Ordered the base model midnight, getting it this Thursday. Can't wait. Using it for some small Xcode development coming from a 2012 Mac Mini, so I won't be complaining. That's awesome. I think you'll like it. If you're coming from a Mac Mini, yeah. Am I home alone today as well? No, my dad's in the other room. He's working. He wants to get the legacy Macs all set up. He's working on the Macintosh Classic, which is a Mac that's older than me, and he also has the old iMac there, and he's got some like programs that he wants to showcase with them. So we'll probably do that stream later in the week, like on a Thursday or a Friday. We'll do a live stream, and he'll be there, and we can just showcase like here's some Apple computers that have lasted decades, which I thought might be fun for the channel. But he's in the other room. My wife is with my mom and my sister. They're kind of checking out some furniture stores and stuff just for fun, just looking out. But yeah. So I'm not completely alone. This quality is giving grandparents Skype call. Another good reason to get MacBook Pros for the big screen. It definitely costs a lot more for the big screen, but yeah. The Air is meant for a certain group of people. And yeah, it's a very common group. That's another thing people forget is like, while the tech community may be very interested in the MacBook Pros and such, the Air is the most common. Like, that's the best selling Mac still to this day. And the MacBook Air really has never been about high performance. Like, from the beginning, from the very first MacBook Air, it's always just been about portability and simplicity and just making a thin, lightweight design. Um, and really, when it started, it wasn't even that affordable. They originally had like regular MacBooks that were cheaper, and then the Air was more expensive but thinner. Now we've reached the point where being thinner doesn't necessarily mean more expensive. You can make a very thin, very lightweight laptop and still make it cheap. So there's not really a bunch of compromises, and I don't think you could make this MacBook much cheaper if you just made it thicker. I don't think that would save much on cost. Um, it's not a Power Mac. No, I think it's before that. Might have been before that. Um, can it fit in an envelope? Probably. I wouldn't be surprised. For heavy schoolwork and light photo editing, would you recommend the M1 Air or M2? Well, this kind of gets into the discussion I'll probably have in the tech review later, but you guys are watching the stream, so you get a little bit of a sneak peek. I'm boiling the I'm brewing, that's the term, not boiling. I'm brewing the review in my head of like what I want to say about this machine. And kind of the conclusion I'm coming to is that it's just a, this this wording might be confusing, but the M2 MacBook Air is really a pro version of the Air. It's really like someone pointed out something that I haven't been able to unsee. Nowhere on this device does it say MacBook Air. It's not written or engraved on the back or anything. Nowhere does it say MacBook Air. And in my view, it's like, I don't think you should really go with the M2 chip over the M1 for performance reasons. Like even ignoring the read and write speed complaints and the thermal throttling and stuff. Like the M2 chip in many aspects is faster, but you have to, like, well, what if you're getting the base model and the read and write speeds actually are worse than the M1? It's like, I think if you're buying a base model MacBook, you're not going to notice or care those things anyway, care about those things. So it's a toss up to me. It's like, okay, there might be a few instances where the M1 is faster, and in most instances the M2 is faster. But even in the regions where the M2 is faster, it's usually only faster by like a few seconds in an export or something. It's not like miles faster. It's like a 15% or 10% speed improvement. That's not a reason to spend another $200, $300 in my view. Like that doesn't justify the extra expense. The reason you should be going for an M2 Air is because the bells and whistles, everything else about the laptop, which I'm not saying are pointless, like the webcam, like I'm showing you guys right now, is much better, twice the resolution basically of the M1 MacBook Air. The microphones are improved. And while some of you guys may think, okay, the webcam and the mic, who cares? It's a computer. It's about processing. It's like, I think you're missing the point. Like, a lot of people are working from home now and doing a lot of Skype calls and Zoom meetings, and they don't want to have to pack additional webcams or additional microphones and stuff. They want to have a good quality set of mics and a good camera if they're going to be using it for work, and they're going to be using it in a lot of different circumstances. So if you care about additional ports, like having MagSafe plus the two USB-C ports, if you care about having an updated design language, some people care about the aesthetics. I consider that kind of a bell and whistle. This one definitely looks more modern. I love the look of it. It's miles ahead in a design scheme in my head than the M1 MacBook Air. It's a fine design. It's just kind of been around for a long time. That Retina MacBook Air has been around since 2018, so it's kind of a 4-year-old design. It's kind of dated, and now that you have the full row of function keys, you got the new color options like midnight and stuff. If you care about those aesthetics and you care about having, a more modern display, something that's just a bit more up to date with modern day MacBooks, that's what you're paying for. I don't think you should spend up the extra money for the performance between M1 versus M2. If you're on a budget, there's no denying the M1 MacBook Air is a better deal. I don't think anyone will win any argument saying that no, you should spend an extra $400 or $500 on an M2 MacBook Air because you'll really get your money's worth with it. I mean, it's a little bit faster and the display's a little bit better, and with the airline, it's not so much about functionality. People who are choosing the Air are choosing aesthetics and lightweight design. They're going for something small. They're going for something unintrusive. Something that's not going to rev up its fans and distract you. So in that regard, this is a little bit better at live streaming than the MacBook Pro, because when I stream off the MacBook Pro, those fans start screaming, and you can actually start to hear it sometimes if the machine is hot. People will be like, "Oh yeah, you can hear the fans running." That'll never be a problem with this. Um, yeah, the camera, you probably wouldn't notice a difference, but I don't really have something to compare it to because I haven't live streamed off the M1 MacBook Air. But the quality would be objectively worse. I feel confident saying that. I'm not streaming at 1080p, so I'm not streaming at 4K, so I don't expect it to make a difference on a 4K TV, obviously. But that's not what most people are doing with the camera. I'd love to see Midnight on so many different products, headphones especially. Yeah, Mike was asking earlier how the smudges are. Um, I think it's a little bit of placebo thing. It's kind of like people have drawn attention to it, so now I notice it. But what I've figured out is like if I start thinking about fingerprints and smudges, I will notice that on any MacBook. Like I'll go back to the MacBook Pro and I'm like, yeah, I can see it there too, in that space gray. What's actually more distracting on the midnight color is the dust. I don't know if it's because of my hair or whatever, my psoriasis, but I just notice a lot more particulates on the MacBook Air, and I feel like I'm always wiping it down and cleaning it all the time. Um, but a lot of people are not using the midnight color in broad daylight. A lot of people use their MacBooks in their bedroom and in the dark, and you're not going to notice those smudges anyway. I think just in the proper lighting, it's really awesome to have a MacBook that basically looks matte black. Like I'm looking at it right now, and I don't even see like a hint of blue. In this lighting, in this room, this basically looks like a matte black laptop. And I've wanted a matte black MacBook for years, so it's awesome to finally have one. Um, oh, it doesn't have HDR, no. What streaming software do you use? I use Ecamm Live, and it's so incredibly efficient. My M1 iMac gets like 120 without fans on. Yeah, my I use OBS just because that's what I'm used to and it's free. But I don't check the temperatures that often, to be honest. Your lighting effect will how much smudge you see, like your phone screen in direct sunlight. Oh yeah, true. If you hold an iPhone that you haven't cleaned off in a while directly in sunlight, you will see a lot of smudges and micro scratches and stuff. It's kind of the same thing with midnight. It's like if it's in the right lighting, you can see a lot of fingerprints and smudges, but I haven't noticed that non-midnight MacBooks are immune to that. It's just a little bit maybe more noticeable on midnight, but like, yeah, I can see oil smudges. And when I do my review, I'll try to do a side by side and showcase, like, oh, yeah, you can definitely see the difference. A lot of people don't mind the smudges, it's true. Um, it's mainly dust, I agree. $19 polishing cloth released before MacBook Air. I wouldn't buy that, but it's a laptop at the end of the day. What I'm actually more paranoid about is there's people that have posted like when you plug in cables on the midnight color, it's very easy to scratch the paint. So I actually haven't plugged in a single USB-C cable to this laptop yet, and I'm not sure I will, just because I kind of like it being wireless and just using it without anything attached to it. I have charged it via MagSafe, but I will admit I was pretty careful to like slowly plug in the MagSafe cable and not like wing it and be like, let me scratch it against the, just hold it in the general area, and then it locks in place and starts charging. Um, I'm worried that I'm going to scratch the paint unintentionally. Um, while streaming with Ecamm Live, it uses like 7% CPU streaming at 4K. It's made only for Mac. Oh, that's cool. Maybe I'll have to check that one out. Your camera looks as good as my Logitech Brio. I don't know if that's good, but I assume it's better than it used to be. This is basically the same webcam on my MacBook Pro. So it's cool that that's not restricted to a Pro laptop anymore. Like, this webcam is better than the M2 MacBook Pro. So That's why I kind of view this MacBook as this is the regular one. Like you guys were saying, why don't they just have a regular MacBook that's in between? This is basically it. It doesn't say MacBook Air anywhere on this laptop. It has it has a bigger display than the 13-inch Pro. It has a better webcam than the Pro, has better ports than the 13-inch Pro. And I think most people can agree that 13-inch Pro just shouldn't really exist, at least at that spec and that price point. Like that shouldn't be there. So in Drew's made up MacBook line, I would drop the 13-inch Pro. This would be the regular MacBook, and the M1 would just remain as the Air for longer, just to be like the cheap one. But yeah, it would be nice to have the. I don't know if I'm not sure if I would get it on my Pro anymore now, seeing how much dust like shows up on it. Um, and I'd be a little bit concerned about the paint scratching with ports because you're just, wiggling around metal alongside those ports and you notice that kind of thing. So, yeah, it just makes me a little bit nervous, but um, we'll see how it ages. I think there's a lot of people that will probably own the Midnight MacBook Air for years, and then we'll see what it looks like, and we can make a more firm decision based on that. MacBook Pro 13 inches like the old design iPad. Yeah, but it's not as cheap. It should be the cheapest MacBook, and yet it isn't. So, did you end up bringing your MacBook Pro? Yes, I still have it because I think there's a good chance I'm going to be done with the MacBook Air and part ways with it, and I'll still need to work. I'll still need to get videos done. Um, and it's a great charge bank. The fact that the MacBook Pro has this big battery pack in it with USB-C ports, so if you need to charge something on the go while you're traveling, you can just convert it into a giant battery bank. It's pretty sweet. Hi from France. I'm glad to be able to join the live. Did you test it with Lightroom? I want to buy it for photo editing. No, I haven't. Sorry, other channels, probably Max Tech will check out Lightroom. I don't have it, and I don't pay for Creative Cloud. There might be some test I can do, but I'm sure there's other channels that have tested Lightroom. I'm just not intending on using it for that. So I just don't use Lightroom. It's not that I'm lazy, it's just that I don't use Lightroom for anything regularly. So if I did even pay for Lightroom or get a free trial of Lightroom, I wouldn't really know how to put it to its limits and test it out to the way you would probably do it. So I will let the Lightroom users test it for that. I'm kind of in favor of everyone on YouTube kind of test it for your uses. And there's certain channels that will do more photo editing and they can cover that. And I'm kind of the guy that likes doing a lot of video editing and live streaming. So I'm live streaming with it right now to see how the battery performs and to see how the mic sounds and that kind of stuff. And that gives you my perspective on it. Hey, thank you for the super chat, Connor, by the way. That was nice of you. He says, do you think the Air should have an HDMI port to hook up to an external monitor? Uh, I don't think it's a. I don't even know if it would fit, to be honest, just looking at the side. It's pretty dang thin. It's so freaking thin, HDMI might not fit. Maybe if you guys know of any laptops out there that are this thin that have HDMI ports, I'll stand corrected. But to be honest, I've never used the HDMI port on my MacBook Pro. It's there, and I don't really mind it being there. It's not hurting anything by being there, but I just haven't used it. I haven't had a time where I was like, oh, let me put this up on the big screen. But that's typically because I can AirPlay most of the time, and if I am using an external monitor with my MacBook Pro, it's probably going to be something made by Apple, and I'm going to use Thunderbolt. I'm going to use USB-C because the HDMI port on the MacBook Pro is already not very good. It's HDMI 2.0, which can't do as much as Thunderbolt 4 can. So, yeah. The problem is that all the YouTubers do video editing. I don't think, I mean, they all do it because you watch videos. You watch YouTube videos and someone has to make them. So obviously they're going to talk about video editing. And to be fair, it is a pretty common use case. There's a lot of video editing going on in the creator space and in the freelance space. It's a fairly popular segment. 3D modeling is one thing, but I don't know if I would say that 3D modeling is more common than video editing. I know a lot of people that do video editing. I don't know that many people that do 3D editing, 3D modeling. That's just my own personal anecdotal evidence. But Yeah, like I've seen that complaint a lot before, is that YouTubers just talk about video editing, but um, I think it's better to suggest things you want them to test out. If there's specific use cases that they can do, I'm not saying they'll do all of them, but if there's enough demand, if there's a bunch of people asking for the same test, then people will do it. I just see a lot of people complain, oh, it's not just video editing, it's not just video. Okay, what is it? It's just use this one program. It's this one obscure video game I like to play that's used to be on Mac, but they haven't optimized it for Apple. Tell me about that. It's like, okay, I don't think that's gonna. If they talked about that, a bunch of people would start complaining. I don't do that. I don't care about that. So YouTubers are kind of catering towards like what's the most common use case, and I think video editing is a pretty common one. So that's why they go to that. Yes, this is the MacBook Air's microphone. Um, I saw those tests, but they were doing like insane 50 photos at the same time with raw 50 megapixel pictures, and then they'll complain about it that it stresses the GPU. Oh, that's funny. Thank you for the super chat, Jacob. That's very nice of you. He said, I do video editing solely on my 11 Pro Max, and I'm editing 4K at 60 videos, hiking in the woods, and watching this live stream at the same time. Wow, that's a lot. You have reception out there? That's impressive. Yeah, no, that even iPhones can do some basic video editing. I think it's not so much silicon constrained at that point. It's more of an issue with screen space. Like you can only edit so quickly with the touch screen. You got to get really quick with your thumbs and know how to handle the software. And I've just, even when I got really really fast at LumaFusion, I found that I could still edit faster with a keyboard and mouse, opposed to touch. But I used to do all of my videos on this channel off an iPad. That was a long time ago. And once again, thank you for the super chat, Raymond. He says space gray or silver stainless steel Apple Watch 7. So it's technically graphite. They don't call this. This is what I have. It's the graphite steel Series 7. I think it looks pretty sweet. For the sake of design symmetry, I would say pick whatever your iPhone is. Like if you have a silver iPhone, get the silver watch because the steel kind of matches and that looks cool. If you have a graphite phone, get the graphite watch. If you don't have a steel iPhone, then silver pops pretty well. I feel like silver just kind of complements any watch band. It's very reflective. It's very like a mirror finish. So I don't think you could go wrong with silver. I think it might show scratches a little bit more noticeably than graphite. So if you're concerned with aging, graphite might look a little better. I don't notice any micro scratches on mine. It looks pristine. It looks great. But I might say lean towards graphite if you already have a graphite product. But if you don't have a graphite product, then silver is probably a safe way to go. Maybe try Minecraft on M2 when you get the chance. Yeah, I probably will. Marngel says, it's impressive how the M2 Air is thinner than the original iPad and original iPhone. It's impressive how far tech has gone in performance and form factor over the past decade. Yeah, it's cool symmetry to showcase it, like with my dad showing off the Macintosh classics and the original iMacs, and then seeing how capable these MacBooks are getting. Based on the performance tests I've seen, I'm very early in my video editing experience. Here we go again. YouTubers just talk about video editing. But sorry, that's my job. That's a lot of what I do, so it's easy to talk about. But I exported a video today, and it was pretty quick. I mean, it wasn't at a super high resolution. And again, I'm editing iPhone footage, not high-end ProRes RAW footage or anything like that. But considering how quick it was able to crank it out, I was impressed. I think that for a fanless design, the battery life holds up pretty well. Um, Steal your iPhone. I once had a Sam's Club associate give me their MVNO sales pitch. He asked by asking who my current carrier is, and when I said Mint Mobile, he instantly gave up. That's hilarious. Yeah. They're just so dang cheap. It's like impossible to beat them. I agree. Man, I always feel bad when I start saying good things about Mint because people are all going to think it's sponsored. I'm not sponsored. I'm not paid by them. It's just if you're not a heavy data user and you want cheap internet, it's impossible to beat them. I got Midnight, obviously. What's your favorite Apple product thus far? Probably Big Money Sunny. I like that name. Thanks for asking. Longtime supporter. Probably right now, at least, it's the 16-inch MacBook Pro. That thing is like 8 months old and it still continues to impress me, both with the battery life, the export times, and like I said recently with the speaker quality. The low frequencies of those speakers on the MacBook Pro are insanely good. So that's probably my favorite right now. I like my iPhone. My iPhone's very capable and the camera's good, but there's still just some very obvious things I want them to fix and address, mostly being the Lightning port. I'm so done with Lightning. I just want to be Type C, all the things. I just want to be done with Lightning. It's so old and not bilateral, and I hate carrying around the USB-C cables and the Lightning cables. It's like we just got to switch everything to one standard, and Type C is the best port for that. So I charge my phone with MagSafe all the time anyway, so it's not like if the iPhone 15 does get Type C, I'm not going to upgrade just for that alone because I probably wouldn't use it very much anyway. But um, yeah, it's fine. I plan on owning the 13 Pro Max for a while, but it doesn't wow me like the MacBook Pro does, I guess. Just because it sets so many records with display size and the high refresh rate and um, the Touch ID works great and the speaker qualities are fantastic. So that's probably my favorite right now. While buying a brand new M1 MacBook Air from Apple, does it come with only one or two NAND chips in the base model? I think it still comes with two. Yeah. Yeah. I don't think they switched that on the old base model that I'm aware of. But honestly, I wouldn't recommend anyone buy full price base model M1 MacBook Air. It's been out long enough that you can find a deal pretty easily. If you're in the US at least, certified refurbished has had Apple certified refurbished, which is basically brand new. They give you the full warranty and everything, and you basically can't even tell it's been used at all because they replace a lot of the components and the chassis and all that, and they clean it up real nice. But they've been selling M1 MacBook Airs for $850 for a long time. That's a very fast computer for the price and still very portable and very capable. It's like it may not look as new or as modern as this one does, and the display isn't as bright, and maybe the speakers aren't as good, and the webcam is compromised. But as far as there's people out there, most people out there, I don't think will care about those little things. Like, do you care that your MacBook looks like a MacBook from 4 years ago? It's like, no, I just need a MacBook to work. I want a laptop with a good keyboard and a good trackpad, and that can do some basic stuff, and just get the job done. That's still a perfect laptop for that. I don't think this MacBook is. I mean, it looks very different, but I don't think it's miles ahead in the regard that the old one is just not even worth considering anymore. Like, as we've seen with the M2 chip performance, it's not miles ahead of the M1, especially if you buy the base model. It's actually worse in some areas, but not areas you'll likely notice. But as far as like, will everyday consumers care about having the latest design or care about having MagSafe or having a notch or a better webcam and stuff? There's a lot of people that probably won't. So yeah, I could still see myself recommending the M1 MacBook Air to a very large demographic of people. In fact, it's a pretty narrow demographic that should buy this one, in my view. It's not a super wide addressable market. It's like if you're on if you can't afford a Pro, but you want something more modern than the old Air, you want something newer, but not too expensive. I guess it's just in that kind of weird regard. Can you please explain how you triple tap the iPad screen to zoom in? It's in accessibility settings. Just go to settings and accessibility and find a triple tap to zoom. I don't know the exact combo, but I'm sure if you Google it, it'll walk you through it. I may be looking forward to the M2 Mac Mini and see how it compares to the M1 model. Yeah, I just think that people's expectations for year over year chip, or not year over year, but generation over generation M series upgrades were expecting too much. If you think the M2 is a disappointment, you're probably were expecting way too much growth. Like, we already had this giant leap with Apple Silicon. We went from Intel to M1 and it was this giant leap. And it's just inevitable that we weren't going to get another giant leap like that in another year or 2 years with the M2. In the same way, I think you should look at them like A13 to A14 chip, A14 to A15 chip. It's like there's some improvements, but they're not like, oh my God, this iPhone is so much faster. It's like, oh yeah, no, you can use an iPhone from 3 years ago and the chip is still probably overkill for what you're doing with it. It's fine. They bake in a lot of overhead with those iPhone chips. And maybe because it's computers, people care more about the chip performance and they pay more attention to it because they can use it for computing and more processing stuff, like more power intensive things. So maybe that's why people are expecting more. But yeah, I bet the M2 Mac Mini will be again another marginal like 50% faster than the M1 Mac Mini. Just little minor upgrades here and there. It's like, okay, yeah, in this instance, it's when you're exporting a video, it took 20 seconds less time. Is that worth buying a whole machine over? It's kind of nice to have upgrades. It's like most people I don't think are buying M1 machines and then buying M2 machines. It's like the people that are buying the M2 MacBooks are coming from 2017, 2016 MacBooks. So whether they get the full read and write speed of the M1 doesn't really matter to them because it's still a massive upgrade over their last machine. So it's like if they're in the market for a MacBook and they buy one, they want to make sure they get like the latest and greatest available today. And that's why I'm not saying it's bad that the M series chips aren't a big upgrade or Apple should only do chip upgrades every 3 years instead because then it'll be more meaningful. It's like, no, if someone's in the market, they should buy something that came out in the last year. You wouldn't want to be we're complaining all the time about the Apple Watch Series 3. Like, you don't want to be buying tech from 5 years ago because if you're buying a piece of hardware today, there's a good chance you plan on using it for another 4 to 5 years. So uh, that's why that's why it's good to have updates annually, even if they're not major. Just to make sure that people, when they do buy, are buying the latest stuff. Uh, Let's see. I could see Apple changing M1 MacBook Airs manufactured after July to switch over to the slower one as well. Maybe. I bet certified refurbished wouldn't be because they're not brand new. So even so, it'd be better to buy a discounted one. I would still recommend the M1 to a budget conscious normal user over the M2. Yes, I'm 100% with you there, Michael. If someone's primary motivation when buying the laptop is what's the cheapest one I can get, I'm not going to mention the M2. The M2 is for like the budget tech enthusiast. Maybe that's the most simple way I can summarize it. You're a tech enthusiast, so you care about having like the newer display and the newer camera and the better microphone. You care about all those bells and whistles, but you can't afford a MacBook Pro, or you just don't want the thickness. Some people don't like having a thicker, bigger MacBook Pro. They want something thin and lightweight. So there's tech enthusiasts. That's why earlier I described it as it's kind of the MacBook Air Pro. And I don't mean pro in regards to professional. I mean pro like AirPods Pro. It's more expensive, but it's got nicer features. That's kind of where I view this MacBook is like if you're willing to pay a premium to have the newer stuff. Um, Budget as in you don't want to spend $2,000 on your MacBook. I think if your budget is $2,000 or more, you should probably just get a MacBook Pro. That's so much better than this, and honestly, they're not that heavy. Like maybe that's just me, but I don't know. I did a pretty intensive workout with my dad this morning, and I didn't do very well. So I'm not a super strong guy, but I just don't think that even the 16-inch MacBook Pro I don't think is very heavy, and it's very easy to put in a backpack. And I've checked out the 14-inch MacBook Pros. I still think they're pretty light and easy to move around. It's not like, oh my God, it's so heavy, it's so thick. It's like, yeah, this is thinner and lighter, but I don't know if I would put that as like you should compromise that much. Like if you were spending $2,000 regardless, you're like, should I get a Pro or an Air? Um, the compromises you have to make with this display, being 60 hertz and the bezels being thicker and the speakers not being as great and the ports not being as great and all that and the thermal architecture not being as good and the M1 Pro versus the M2 chip is like all of those compromises just for the sake of, well, it's a little lighter. Some people might care about those things, but I'm like, I'm sorry. Like I won't say anyone should really get the 2 terabyte uh, 24 gigs of RAM MacBook Air. if you're dropping that kind of money, you should just opt for the Pro at that point. Salute to your dad for working out with you. Is he a techie as well? Yeah, no, yeah. Our interest in Apple kind of, my interest in Apple started with him because he was into Apple products and used them because he was a teacher for a long time. And um, he's we're gonna go watch him do jujitsu later. He's into martial arts and stuff, so I'm excited. But yeah, I'm good. I'm good terms with my dad. We like talking about Tesla and Apple and SpaceX and everything. So most of the time when we've ever had him on the channel, everyone's like, "Yep, I see where Drew gets his personality from. He's just me but older." That's it. Robin Brooks says, "I have a 14-inch MacBook Pro, and if I need something lighter, I'll just grab my iPad. Don't see a need personally for a lighter laptop, but I'm also not the target market persona." Yeah, I don't know that many people that would be that bothered by the weight of the 14-inch now anyway. Do you think the M2 MacBook Pro will be the last Mac that uses that same dated design? I hope so. I don't know. I wouldn't have thought they would have done this again. I thought it was a little weird that they did it with the M1, and that was in 2020. Now it's in 2022, and they're still doing it. So I have a feeling that that design with the touch bar and everything is going to overstay its welcome. I have a feeling that that old chassis and the old port selection and that dated display, I think that's going to hang around a lot longer than we want it to. It's going to be like 2 years from now, we're going to be like, why are they still selling this? And it's going to be because people buy, people buy it, people will take it because of that name. I think it's a weird naming scheme they have with the MacBook lineup because there's so many different ones. They have the M1 Air is so different from the M2 Air. The 13-inch Pro is so different from the 14-inch Pro. It's like there's so many changes depending on either what chip is in it or what screen size it has. There's so many differences. But I think Apple has realized that these names are very iconic, and they're trying to keep the naming structure really simplified of just like this is the Air and this is the Pro. But they have like four different MacBook, like the M1 Air is this wedge design versus the M2 Air, which is this more flat design. But they're still called the Air. It's just the M1 versus the M2, that one chip, and that chip isn't really that different, but the designs around the chip are very different. And then with the Pro, you have this dated design with a 60 hertz LCD display with these old port selections. And then if you go up 1 inch to the 14-inch Pro, you get mini LED, you get 120 hertz, you get HDMI ports, you get SD card slots, you get the M1 Pro chip, you get a redesigned chassis and different speakers, different webcam. Like there's so much difference, but they've chosen to keep the naming scheme so simplified that it just kind of results in a little bit of confusion. But I think it's because those names are just so iconic. Like I don't think the MacBooks would sell better if they complicated the naming structure. Here's the MacBook SE, here's the regular MacBook, here's the Air, here's the Pro. In our heads it would make a lot more sense, but I don't think business wise it would result in more sales. I think that Apple likes to say the MacBook Pro starts at $1,300. And if they changed anything about the 13-inch Pro, gave it better silicon, gave it faster chips, gave it a better webcam or a better display. If they changed anything about it, it would no longer be $1,300. The price would go up. And I think it would objectively sell worse if it was called the MacBook SE. I know that makes sense in our heads. We're all saying like, yeah, it's dated. They should just call it the MacBook SE, like the iPhone SE. I don't think that name would catch very well in markets. Like most people go into an Apple store and think, oh, I don't know about the Air. It seems kind of thin and kind of cheaper looking. And so, well, this one's a Pro. Ooh, that one's the MacBook Pro. Yeah, that's a very iconic name. Some people just associate the term Pro with MacBook. It's like one and the same name. I think that people walk in the store and hear MacBook Pro and think, oh, that one's the one I want because I'm a pro and I'm a heavy user. So they think $1,300. Okay, I can do that. Whereas if the MacBook Pro started at $2,000, that would be really intimidating. And people would be like, what? That's crazy. You can't get one. So it's just a naming thing. It's the name and the price. It's that Pro and the $1,300. That's why it sells. If you took away the name Pro, it wouldn't sell as well. But yes, Kenny, the mics I'm using, everything is straight off the MacBook Air. I'm using the onboard microphone and the onboard webcam, just so you guys get an indication of what it sounds and looks like. Um, let's see. I love putting my Air and iPad Pro 13-inch in my bag, and it's like carrying nothing. I found the iPad Pro with the Magic Keyboard case pretty heavy, to be honest. It was definitely heavier than this and kind of bulky. Do you think it's worth it to buy the 14-inch MacBook Air as an upgrade from the Air? There's no 14-inch Air. I'm not sure what you mean. But I would say if you're on an anything M1 right now, there's no need to upgrade yet. Unless you're just unless you're just really into the new design or the new, I don't know, that it's not the performance though. The M2 chip is in some cases faster and in a couple of cases slower. So it's like if you're on an M1 equipped Mac, I don't think you should upgrade. I think you should probably just keep using your Mac for another 2 or 3 years. And that's honestly what most people do, which is what I kind of found funny because, a lot of YouTubers were complaining, like, yeah, see, the M1 chip is actually faster than M2. This is crazy. It's like, well, most people aren't coming from the M1. They're coming from a totally different ballpark. They're coming from an Intel Mac from 2016 to the M2 chip. They're not going to notice read and write speed that much because the last Mac they had is so slow. So iPad cases, I looked up Logitech ones and was surprised about the weight. Yeah, they get the job done. I mean, I don't know of that many people complaining about weight in tablets and stuff, but they work. They functionally you can carry it around. Um, let's see. What is your most favorite Apple product of all time? I'm not that kind of guy that has like a preferred. I think my dad's watching the stream in the other room. I was like, I hear someone talking and it sounds like me. That's funny. Um, I hear the what was the question again? Sorry, my mind went blank. I'm not the kind of guy that has like a legacy history product that I was like that was the best one ever. It's like layers of Steve Jobs was not very nostalgic either. He wasn't like, oh yeah, this old Apple product that was my favorite. He was like comparing it to layers of rock forming a mountain. Um, it's like as soon as the newer products come out, that's my all-time favorite because it's like, well, I like 120 hertz and I like the webcam quality and I love the speaker quality. So like right now, the 16-inch MacBook Pro, but in 10 years, if there's a MacBook Ultra that has way better specs or way better ports that can do way more than my current MacBook Pro, that'll be my favorite. So some people have that nostalgia, like, oh, the iPhone 4, that was my favorite Apple. That was so cool, just for all the change. I'm like, no, I mean, I love the iPhone 10. That feels like the biggest. I don't say that's my favorite Apple product of all time because the size wasn't what I liked and the battery life wasn't very good and the camera wasn't as good as we have now. So, there's context to the situation, but I will admit that the iPhone 10 was like the biggest year over year upgrade we ever got in regards to iPhones. There was never more changes than the iPhone saw than with the iPhone 10. So I see that as the biggest upgrade, the biggest change, but I wouldn't say that was my favorite Apple product of all time. So I'm the kind of guy that's like, whatever the newest one is. What's your favorite iPhone? The 13 Pro Max. And if you ask me next year, it's probably the 14 Pro Max or something. It just keeps changing. Let's see. M1 Air is the best laptop ever made for $1,000. You can get it for under 1,000. I don't know where you are in the world, but if you're in the U.S., you can get Apple certified refurbished, $850, incredible value, even with all of the things it's missing over this MacBook. It's like, okay, it's a 720p webcam. Okay, there's only two USB-C ports, but honestly, it's a MacBook Air. How many dang ports are you using if you're buying an Air at the end of the day? Like, are you plugging into both of those all the time? And do you care about the display brightness on an Air? No, you're going to be thinking about, I got a good deal on this thing when you're using it. You're not going to be thinking about all the things you're missing. You're just going to be like, I got this for under $1,000 and it's really fast and the battery life is great. That's what you'll be thinking about. Um, I would keep them both. I just ordered M2 Air and will buy an iPad as soon as they send me the gift card. The iPad is awesome on its own, but with a MacBook, you can use it as a second screen too. It's kind of an expensive second screen, but I guess you can do that. Martingale says, in my opinion, most smartphone and laptop comparisons should be between the latest generation and 2 or 3 or 4 year old devices, considering that's how often most people upgrade. Yeah, I looked that up. Most people buy or most people hold on to their MacBooks on average between 5 to 7 years. That's like the average use case. So comparing year over year changes is kind of interesting to be like, okay, how much of an improvement did Apple make? But as far as everyday users go, it's like it's kind of useless to compare year over year changes. Um, I'm not buying the 14 Pro Max, no, but that I'm just saying that will probably be, in my view, the best iPhone. I don't love the eye hole, but it will probably be my favorite iPhone of all time. I don't think it's worth buying, but it's the best one. So my favorite is always just going to be the best one available. Um, Let me check up here if there was anything I missed. I mean, there's a lot. Yes, Mike, my dad still uses the 11 Pro Max. He's happy with it. No complaints so far. That's his daily driver. Um, M1 iPad Air is the budget M1 device for the tech enthusiast. Yeah, it's kind of, yeah, in that regard, yeah, you're right. It's like you care about having the extra performance, but you're not gonna spend the money on a pro. It's kind of a weird market. It's like you're really into tech, but you don't have a big budget. That's kind of what those are for. Um, M1 Air is the default recommendation for any Mac. If you don't know what you want, then you should probably get an M1 Air because if you don't know what you want, you probably don't notice or care about things like the webcam or the ports or the, display size and that kind of stuff. Um, if you're visiting your parents right now, does that mean you're in the house with the attic? No, that was back in California. That was we're out of state. We're far away from home now. It takes like 12 hours for it took me 12 hours to drive here. If you stop for food, it usually takes like 14 hours, but we didn't stop. We ate while we were driving. And we only stopped one time for gas, and then we were back on the road again. I was hoping to do that drive in our Tesla, but the Tesla's not ready yet. And the Tesla definitely won't be able to do that drive in 12 hours, but that's okay because it will cost like a quarter, and we'll have more time to. We'll be forced to stop to charge, and on those stops, I can stretch my legs and we can get some food instead of, the gas car. It's like, well, it's going to cost us the same thing no matter how long it takes. So let's just go. Let's just get there as fast as we can because that's the one advantage of driving a gas car is you can make good time on a trip. Um, don't know about other countries, but from mine, the Apple refurbished site has next to nothing. Yeah, I've heard that that's not always available, but I have to imagine in your area, whether it be Best Buy or Amazon, when a product, especially an Apple product, has been out for a while, and the M1 MacBook Air has been out for a while, you will usually find it on sale or somewhere for much cheaper than new. And you probably won't notice that many compromises by getting it used. Is an Apple Watch Pro really justifiable, especially with the hefty price tag? I think it could be if they give it features exclusives. Like right now, there's very little justification for the Apple Watch Edition. It's the exact same watch with the exact same silicon, same battery life, same display as this watch. It's just made out of a slightly nicer material, so they charge extra for it. Apple doesn't really do that with any other product. It's not like the MacBook Pro is just made of titanium, but it's the exact same hardware as the MacBook Air. It's like Pro for Apple means like profit, more expensive but more features. So if they want to develop an Apple Watch that has more features than the entry level one, better display, better battery life, or better silicon, or anything like that, more health sensors, that could kind of justify the extra expense. That would an Apple Watch Pro would make far more sense than a Apple Watch Edition. I have a feeling that the sales on the Apple Watch Edition have like flatlined. Like there were YouTubers I would watch that used to buy the editions that don't buy them anymore, and I never see anyone with Apple Watch editions in real life. So I know that's kind of anecdotal evidence, but people have just probably figured out that these watches, because they're rechargeable batteries, they don't last um, a super long time. You typically can get them to last 4 or 5 years, and then the battery's bad, and you got to get a new one anyway, or you'll stop getting software support. So people are like, yeah, I'm not going to drop like $1,000 or $1,500 on a watch unless it comes with something else. If you actually get if you can buy that same exact watch like this for $300 or $400 or $500 less, people will just do this. It's not worth the extra expense. But especially because Apple Watch resale value is not that great. Um, iPhone resale value is much better. You can hold on to an iPhone for 2 or 3 years and still recoup a lot of the cost. Whereas an Apple Watch, after just like 1 year, it's worth like less than half of what you paid for it. So there's not a lot of people justifying that kind of expense. But if you came out with a pro option and said, well, this one lets you do such and the display is better and the battery life is better, if they had all these selling points for it, people would be like, okay, now I can justify that expense. I do not plan on getting the Pro Apple Watch though. I love my Series 7. Um, Very happy with it, and I honestly got the steel one because I was planning on owning it for longer than 1 year. My wife's texting me. Um, Currently at Apple Grand Central using the M2 Air. Oh, hey, I've been there. That's cool. Rolex edition. Do you think the Apple Watch edition sells worse than the iPhone mini? Oh, heck yeah. iPhone mini sold relatively bad, but it didn't really in general sell poorly. It sold poorly compared to all the other iPhones, but those all sell insanely well. Those are the best-selling phones in the world. iPhone 13 and iPhone 12, the 6.1-inch versions are like best-selling phones in total. So the Mini sold worse than those, but it still outsold like every Galaxy S phone. Like every Galaxy Note, every Galaxy S21, S20. It outsold all of those. I don't think the Apple Watch editions are outselling much. Um, Maybe the iPod. They sell more Apple Watch editions than iPods. I don't know. I wish I didn't need to have anything Apple to get one. Yeah, I think they know that. There'd be a justification for people to go to Android if they could use their Apple Watch with it. Can you play games on the M2 MacBook Air? Yes. I've always used the example of it's not that Macs can't game, they're just not really optimized for it. And that's mostly on the developer side of things. But like, it's like saying a car can't go backwards. It's like the same thing as saying a Mac cannot game. A Mac can game, it's just not really intended to do that for extended periods. A car can go backwards, it's just not very often or for very long. Um, do you have scratches on your steel on the watch? Not from what I can tell. If they're there, they're very hard to see. But I'm very hard on my watch. I do not go easy on this thing. The main reason I got the steel one was because I wanted the sapphire glass. I got the aluminum Series 6, and after a year of ownership, I was already noticing the micro scratches on the glass. So I was annoyed by it, and I also thought the Series 7 looked really, really cool. I thought, I might get the Series 7, but I'm not sure. But I thought the rounded edge design with the display going over the edges, I thought that looked way cooler than the squared off design. So I was like, even if the Series 8 is squared off, I don't I don't care about that chassis. I don't think that looks better. Um, let's see. All my non-techie friends love the M2 MacBook Air. One of them has an M1 Air but wants to upgrade just for the new design. The regular consumer only cares about the design. I don't think that's all of them, but sure. I'm sure you have non-techie friends, but they care about the looks of things. Um, I still think there's a lot of people that probably would not give a crap how it looked. They're just like, I just want a cheap Mac, and they will still buy the M1 Air. That's probably why Apple's still selling it, because they know people will buy it. Um, why do you think phones are getting bigger and bigger, and is this a good path that companies are going? It's just, it's not the companies that are deciding this. We are deciding this. The public buys what they want, and when the companies see a bunch of the public buying a certain thing, they want to give them more of that thing. So we've decided as a consumer base that we like big phones, and we cannot lie. So Apple tried to make smaller phones and they didn't sell as well. So now they're going to try to make bigger phones and see if they'll sell better. And we're kind of voting with our wallets in that way. If you buy a product, you kind of encourage a company to say, yes, I want you to build more products like this, and you sold me on this product, so Apple will continue to try to keep making things that sell well. Even if it doesn't make sense to a lot of us, like the 13-inch MacBook Pro. But we have proven, as crazy as that laptop is, it's their second best seller. I think after the Air, the 13-inch Pro is what sells the most. So that's why they won't kill it off. It's because it works, you know. Using a Mac for gaming is like using a smart car for long road trips. You can do it, but you don't want to. Not impossible, but I think that's more because of game developers not optimizing their games very well. But they have no reason to optimize their games very well because there's not that many gamers on Mac. I have an Android, and my cellular Apple Watch that I set up with my iPhone when I had one still gets phone calls and texts. It just doesn't pair. Uh-oh. Internet freaked out. Sorry for the lag. I noticed it. We're for those that I don't know if someone asked about this, but where I am, we're on Comcast. Um, so just to let you guys know that even if I streamed off of Comcast, it wouldn't be perfect either. So we're back to landline Xfinity internet right now at this place, but it's not particularly good either. It's fine. It's mostly stable, but you occasionally have dropouts even when you're on land-based internet. So it's not just restricted to Starlink and T-Mobile and stuff. Yes, I'm using the built-in mic, and yeah, it feels pretty dang hot. It's amazing that I can stream for this long and not hear any fans kick in. I'm at 44% battery. I'm actually really impressed with how the battery is held up while live streaming. Usually, when you're uploading content and when you're capturing audio and video and compressing that and posting it all at once, it's a pretty power intensive thing. But I've been live for over an hour and the battery went from 79% to 44%. That's pretty good. That's pretty impressive, in my opinion. These phones will someday reach the size of traditional bricks used to build houses, walls, pathways. Will need satchel like old mobile phones. I'm kind of all for it. I kind of like having a big phone. Just when you're watching videos or showing pictures to people, it's just very handy. I don't hate small phones, but I just understand why they don't sell as well. It makes sense. When you tried gaming, how hot? I haven't tried gaming yet. I've really just unboxed it and then took a road trip and then been visiting with friends and family for the last couple days, and then I just started working again today. And I've made one video with it. That's the first video I did, and I posted it on EV, and it did fine. It did great. The battery didn't use much. I think I used like 10% of the battery while editing a video. It was shot in 4K at 60 frames a second, but because of the internet here being slower, I uploaded it at 1080p. So I don't have a good apples to apples comparison on how fast the export would be between the 16-inch MacBook Pro and this one yet. I will do that in the review. But early impressions are pretty dang good. I'm pretty happy with it. Uh, I was a little underwhelmed by the speaker quality, but you know, a lot of people with this machine are probably going to use headphones anyway. Having a cellular Apple Watch with an Android phone means I still get iMessage and set up only required pairing it with the cheapest iPhone I could find on eBay. I know I've seen videos of people going the long way to make a MacBook. Sorry, not a Mac. To make an Apple Watch Android ecosystem work. It's just not worth the money to me. Like I hate how much money you have to pay for cellular on a watch. It's ridiculous. Um, Do you think iPhones will someday reach the size of the iPad mini? And if so, will that make the iPad mini non relevant? I think the bigger difference between those two products is not the size, it's the aspect ratio. Um, iPhones are getting pretty tall, and I think the 14s are getting even a little bit taller. Everything's getting very narrow and skinny with smartphones, whereas iPads are still pretty, closer to square, more 4 by 3 type aspect ratio. I know the iPad mini isn't 4 by 3, but um, they allow this kind of boxier aspect ratio so that you can do more split screen multitasking. Um, and that's just not as practical with the iPhone. So even though the screen size may be getting close, they're not exactly the same because of those ratio differences. But I don't think we'll quite get to 8.3-inch iPhone displays, but I wouldn't be against it. I could fit an iPad mini in my pocket. I would totally use it if I know it sounds crazy, but I think it'd be a really fun test. I would totally like if they made an iPad mini that was like pro, high end, and you could pair it with your Apple Watch, and it had the same camera as the iPhone 13 Pro Max, and it had Type C, of course, had Thunderbolt, and it had a calculator. It had a fitness tracking and all that with the Apple Watch and stuff. If they gave the iPad mini all of that hardware that the iPhone was rocking, I would totally try to use an iPad mini as my phone. The problem is just that there's so many software limitations that make it near impossible to use or very impractical. because you got to use the cellular with the watch, and you got to find these loophole ways of getting phone calls and SMS texting through the iPad mini. And you basically just have to have an iPhone in a drawer doing all of the heavy lifting. But yeah, I would love it if they tried to make like a super iPhone Ultra or something like that. Yeah, I would rather just have a giant phone than a folding phone, to be honest. Yeah, Robin says I would buy the heck out of an iPad mini with ProMotion. Yeah, that would be better. I don't know if I could justify, like, I kind of already have that with my iPhone. But Halami, thank you for your support. He says, saw Midnight today. I like it in screen size. Good, good. I'm glad you enjoy it. I think in certain lighting, Midnight looks really good. It's just sometimes it collects a lot of dust and it's pretty obvious. Would you wish iOS 17 to allow split screen on the iPhone? I just don't think that aspect ratio would be good with split screen, to be honest. Like, I just don't think splitting it down the middle. I've tried split screen on Androids and I don't care for it. I haven't found it very useful. Your keyboard covers up an entire app and you can't get a good amount of space on either app. So you're seeing like one tweet at a time or one message at a time in Discord and there's no context. And I just haven't seen a split screen multitasking thing that I like on a phone. It really only works for me when it's on something like a tablet because you have a different aspect ratio that can accommodate for two apps running at the same time. But um, it would work horizontally. Yeah, even then, it's still a very small amount of space to me. Like, I don't know. Even on Android and landscape, I mean, we can't even get landscape home screen. You know, they got rid of that a long time ago. So, eh, I don't think I would use it that much anyway. Most people are doing using their phones like this. It's split. If you're doing it like this one handed, you'd be trying to reach over to the other side. You got to play it like this. Yeah. Thank you for the super chat, Jacob. Wow, that was very nice of you. He said, I was looking around in Apple certified refurbished for the sake of it and found they're charging more for a refurbished cellular Series 3 than a brand new Series 7. Wait a minute. Is it because it's steel? That doesn't sound right. Is it because it's a steel Series 3? That's ridiculous. I agree. No one should be buying the Series 3 regardless, but yeah. I would be shocked if it was an aluminum Series 3 that they were selling more for a Series 7. That's ridiculous. Um, how's the battery been on your iPhone 13? Very good. Best battery life I've ever seen in a phone. And in most of the battery tests I've seen, the 13 Pro Max usually comes out ahead. Um, and I'm still at 100% battery health. That hasn't changed last I checked. Um, I noticed that it drains battery pretty dang quick when you're, here you go, 100%. It drains battery pretty quick when you're doing maps, which we did a lot on this trip, but when you're in the car, you typically have a charger. So that's what we did. We just charged it while we were in the car. Um, let's see. Picture in picture on iPhone is good though, and the keyboard isn't going to be always up. I feel like if you're using two apps, usually at least one of them will use the keyboard pretty frequently. But I guess the reason I don't notice it or feel like, oh, why can't I do two apps at once is it's so easy to um, swipe between apps like this. This is what I do all the time. It's like one swipe and you get the full screen version of each app. It takes like no time at all. So I can just use typing using that app. Oh, let me check on this app and I swipe back and forth. So it's very easy to just quickly go between two and you're not covering up as much content when you do that. Um, and I'm on iOS 16. Yeah, my battery's been fine. I like the maps updates they made though. The maps with the um, waypoints and you can add a stop and say, "Oh, go from this location to this location" and that kind of thing. It's nice. They did a good job with the navigation on this. Um, Apple released a 4.5K monitor. I'm pretty sure they can release an iPad Air Mini and even MacBook Air with 90 hertz refresh rate. They could. I don't think it's that they can't. It's just that they want the pros to have noticeable features to justify that cost. If you start bringing 90 hertz or 120 hertz to the lower end models, then that difference of 120 becomes harder and harder to appreciate. Um, how does Apple make the battery so good? They design their own chips. They're very efficient with their chips. Although I still have overheating issues with my iPhone sometimes. Like when I was filming, the channel members saw this because I live streamed the unboxing of this MacBook last week for the channel members. But when I was filming my MacBook Air unboxing last Friday, the iPhone overheated after 13 minutes and it stopped recording. So there was a big chunk of that video that I lost. And it was hot in the room, so it wasn't purely the iPhone's fault, but I didn't want to have a fan or an air conditioner running because it ruins the audio. So I had all the fans off, and you can tell in the video I'm sweating more and more and more as it goes on. But like even when I go on, if I'm on a FaceTime call over 5G, that'll heat up and the display will dim down. So Apple has the most efficient chips in the business, but they still there's room for improvement to make them not overheat so much. Um, but I'm glad that they do have efficient chips because battery life's pretty dang important. Um, let's see. The processor is much more. Yeah, he answered that. I tried to use split screen on a Galaxy Note a while back, and even at 6.8 inches, the screen is still pretty limiting for multitasking. Picture in picture is good though. I use it quite a bit. Yeah, I've been using that pretty frequently. I'm glad they're rolling that out on YouTube to more people. Thank God. It took them long enough. Um, Split could work. If the 13 mini had USB-C and 120 hertz, um, that would have been the perfect iPhone in my opinion. With all due respect, Drew, but I hate big phones and I dislike how most people prefer them. I'm sorry. I know it's a bummer. I don't hate small phones. I just like small and big phones. I'm a fan of both form factors. But yeah, it's a bummer for the people that uh, are fans of the small phones that Apple seems to be moving away from that direction. It's a shame. So hopefully they keep the 13 mini around at a discounted price. With inflation the way it is, I wouldn't be shocked if it doesn't get a huge discount, but still, like, I hope they keep it around and support it as long as they can because it feels like the future. Whoa, I set off something on accident, I think. I think I set my iPhone to ping. Whoops. Um, Beta software doesn't help. No, it doesn't. Uh, I hate how small phones have bad battery life. That's kind of the compromise, though. Is like if you're making a phone with less, the display is getting really dim on my MacBook. They're like, I think it's automatically lowering it because the battery's going down. But when you have less space to work with, you can't make as good a product because you don't have as much room. You just can't fit as good a camera. You can't fit as big a battery. And battery is a pretty important feature to a lot of people. And um, I think when people are spending that kind of money on a phone, they kind of want it to have a big wow factor, and the display is a very good wow factor. Could you see professional made Hollywood movies just with an iPhone? They've done it. Yeah, there was a feature film that won Emmy Awards that or it won the Sundance Film Festival. It was shot on an iPhone 5. And whenever you watch it, it's like, yeah, it looks like an iPhone. You can do it. It's just not like they're not better than cinema grade. Whenever someone shoots a movie on an iPhone, you notice it. Everyone brings attention to it. This was shot on an iPhone. Wow, that looks okay. It's never like they just shoot a whole movie on an iPhone and they don't tell anybody. Otherwise everyone would be like, why does this movie look so cheap? It was shot on an iPhone. Oh, okay, that's kind of impressive. They got to brag about the fact that it's on an iPhone. The M2 Air has color matching MagSafe. That's correct. Yes. Um, that'd be a funny overheating alarm. Most people don't really care about design. I prefer OS, but prefer Samsung Galaxy design. Oh, interesting. You're kind of in the middle. I noticed my 5G devices die quicker. Yes, 5G is absolutely a battery hog compared to 4G. No doubt about that. And I think we rushed 5G technology way too early. Like we didn't need to get it out as fast as we did, but it was kind of outside of Apple's control because all their modems were coming from Qualcomm, so they couldn't do anything. Um, if you change the quality to 480p, it looks like you're live streaming from the new M2 MacBook Pro. Yeah, there you go. You could just change the quality settings on YouTube and you'll know exactly what the old MacBook looks like. There you go. I've been live for a while, so I better be careful because there's I could do this all day if I didn't stop myself. But if there's other videos you guys want made or other things you want covered, feel free to comment them. Believe it or not, I do check the comments and I try to act based on user request if I can. I can't do everything you suggest, but I'll take it into consideration for subjects and ideas and stuff. Um, but I appreciate the super chats and I appreciate you guys watching. That makes a difference. And I'll see you all around. Take care. Have a good one.